Vasudevastam Devam Hamsa Chanaram Vardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagatgurum. We salute Lord Krishna, the world teacher, son of Vasudeva, destroyer of Kamsa and Chanara, the supreme bliss of Devaki. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, or protect us, nourish us. May we work together with great vigor. May our studies have this vigor. May all our activities be full of vigor and energy and strength. May we not unnecessarily disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we are studying the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which has 18 chapters to it. Before this live broadcast, we were telling a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita as the longest philosophical poem in the world, and yet in text, very, very short and precise and concise and very, very profound, with every single one of its words having a profound meaning. In the 16th chapter, I just remind you, the question was brought up, or the topic was brought up about the importance of scripture. Why scripture is important is because how else will we know unless there is a personal record of somebody who has had some direct experience and some kind of indication and guide what we should do in order to attain or discover the supreme purpose of our life, namely freedom. Freedom from pain, and in spiritual terms or religious terms, a vision of the divine. So practical problems were presented in this book, a practical situation giving the most stressful human situation you could think of, and saying, in effect, that if you are suffering from physical pain or psychological pain, most people, the most acute pain would be psychological, or emotional grief, such as associated with dying and death. Is there a way out of this? And all of these scriptures are to do with overcoming grief. And how do you overcome grief? You also transform your life from mortality to immortality. So you make this transformation. This transformation is gone through by means of a process. And this process is laid out in 18 chapters. So scripture is necessary. Scriptural study is necessary. But then, of course, naturally the question arises, what about people who are illiterate? What about people who cannot study? What about people who haven't really got the inclination to study these texts, but nonetheless, they have faith? But first, of course, as last week, we explore what do we mean by faith. So a few things are necessary from other sections of the Bhagavad Gita to understand the subject, because it requires a reevaluation of what we normally think of as existence, as a reality. And the last chapter indicated that if we stress the reality to be identical with energy and matter, expressed in our life as our normal working world with domestic issues and various reactions that give us psychological difficulties and problems, a field of endeavor which inevitably seems to be at times a struggle and at times a joy. The joy being temporary, and the sufferings also being temporary, and the sufferings we don't like to look at, the joys we don't mind recalling. So the very important question is being asked by Arjun, and we addressed it last week, reading out the text, and we think we also read the reply. But it's worth reading again, Because the purport of the answer is this. Don't think that you were born at random, haphazardly in a beginning moment and went on from there, struggling through life with a kind of creaky body made from rusty parts, made from parts that will naturally give you physical pain at some point in time, and you require medication or a doctor, or a mind that requires a psychiatrist, or some kind of psychological advice or consultations. Starting with life in a negative way and working through the whole of life in a patchwork way, what is required? What is required is summarized here as Shraddha, faith. And this faith is of three different types. And as I pointed out last week, time and time again, this Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures will stress something that the ancient philosophers of the Sankhya philosophy identified as three evolutionary components in life that come out in every aspect: physical, psychological, emotional. And these we call gunas. Guna means a rope, something that binds you, something that ties you up. You know, there's an expression, will you see me next week? No, I'm tied up. You see, if we take that literally, it becomes an awkward thing to visualize. You know, when will somebody untie you then? Did a robber come? Well, actually, that's a good analogy. A robber will come because the robber in this case robs you of your freedom. And freedom is our goal. All of this we expressed last week. What happens if you're not a scholar? Don't think that you are born as a non-scholarly person or somebody not interested in the text, and yet you're a good person. You have faith. You have a spirit of generosity. You're basically a morally and ethically sound person, yet you never studied any scriptures. And so Arjuna is asking, you emphasize scriptures. What about such people who are full of faith? What kind of faith is it? And the reply comes, as thy faith is, so be it unto thee. Three types of faith are there. These are mentioned as sattva, rajas, and tamas. That is commensurate with these three evolutionary qualities of life. And studying these time and time again is fundamental to understanding philosophy, because it gives us the opportunity, when we notice rajas and tamas, that if you have a will to play a kind of game, that we can, when we notice these egoistic elements that damage us, these ropes of rajas and tamas, we can then insert something which is full of generosity. And this comes for our development in three flavors, or three activities. One is adoration and worship. The other one is giving away gifts in charity. And the final one is purifying the mind. Purifying the mind through cultivating a will, cultivating inward strength. This is called tapasya, creating a kind of heat or friction that goes against the grain, because the unconscious mind is full of habits, and we have to try to break these habits. But it's very difficult if you attack these habits. If you have a policy that you will train a horse by beating it, then you'll have a very hostile horse, and I think you'll find it's not as conducive as nurturing the horse, coaxing it, giving it something more. If you want to overcome an addiction, then replace it with another addiction. Preferably one which is healthy, one which gives you joy, one which gives you supreme pleasure that outweighs any of the temporary pleasures. Something that is full of all the qualities of strength and beauty and goodness and love and harmony. Try to cultivate that in the conscious mind. The conscious mind alone is your gateway to the unconscious. If you want to reform habits, you can't do it on the unconscious level. You can only cultivate it on the conscious level through these three means. what is called yajna, what is called dana, and what is called tapasya. These three means. And so this whole of this chapter is to do with identifying how will we employ these three tools, and do they come as three varieties, and what kinds of people are born, three kinds of people. So the language used is like that. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Trivitha Bhavati Shraddha Dehinam Sa Svabhavaja. Dehinam, the embodied. Those who, is a very wonderful technical term, those who consciously feel that they have a body. And the more you feel this in the advancement of evolution, the more this free will is there, the more it comes out. We'll find that also. But it's of three kinds, born of their nature. That is the nature, not when you started in your birth now, but what you carried forward. What you carried forward is your natural propensity. That is your psychological nature. And this psychological aspect was explored comprehensively by those Sankhya philosophers. Employed, of course, by the Vedanta also, but the Vedanta superseded many of the dualistic ideas of the Sankhya philosophy. So this Sattvika, this Rajasika, and Tamasika types are there. Now he asks that we should hear about these. So the doings of what we call the embodied soul, that is Jivatman, these doings get embedded. They get embedded and imprinted in the unconscious mind. And we have to recall some important concepts. The 15th chapter we read how memories are accessed by a divine messenger, if you will, who searches for your memories and presents them to the conscious mind. I'm responsible for memory as well as your loss. And so when it arrives at the conscious mind, we call this memory. Prior to that, it's floating around in a subtle form as an impression, deep down in the psyche. And we're able to bring this back. But we ourselves claim it. I remember is our phrase we use. The reality is that the Lord of the universe sits there in the unconscious. And when we interpret this unconscious as it comes out in dreams, we call this dream interpretation. And it can be useful to us because the divine messenger is present. Freud said that dream is the royal road to the unconscious. And we can access this by interpreting all the dreams and all the symbols within it and bringing it to the conscious level to do it. So it is playing a kind of game on the conscious level that is able to change this nature. This nature is not fixed. This nature is simply an accumulation of our habitual behavior. And if we want to change it, we do it at the conscious level. So what is our intrinsic makeup of this Jivatman? And so it is couched in the language of this Shraddha, faith. And last week we explored some of the implications of faith. What does faith mean? Faith in yourself. Now, faith in yourself, that statement can be misinterpreted. Of course, it's good to have faith in your given talents and abilities. A certain self-confidence has to be there. The ego, a component of the mind, it was formed in the human through a psychosocial evolution, which puts us in a commanding position over the rest of nature. We're able to manipulate it nicely as we want in our favor, sometimes against us. That creates a global ecological crisis, something called global warming. Most experts would attribute it to our carelessness about dealing with our environment. So we can change many things externally and internally by accessing and employing our will. And that is why we have free will. But this context of faith can be used in many different ways. So faith in oneself, then faith in nature. We have to have a profound faith that things are working smoothly by themselves without our interference, and that we have the capacity to transform discord into harmony and employ this. This is the commanding nature that we have. There are many stories of faith healers, and I remember one story goes like this. Faith healer in a tent with a huge audience, probably about 1,000 people sitting there, all expecting a cure. And even they brought out the television cameras, and the faith healer is there, and he says to this man in the wheelchair, get up and walk. Of course, it's probably a Christian, so maybe in the name of Jesus. Get up and walk in the name of Jesus. And the man gets up. Everyone's astonished. And he's walking. And says, how do you feel? Says the healer. He says, well, I feel fine, only I still can't see. So he was not sighted. That wasn't his problem. He was just elderly and required a wheelchair, that's all. His legs were fine. So when we say faith and faith healer and all of these kind of things, we have to be careful, because it's not that kind of faith. It's faith in yourself, whereby you yourself decide that you can see metaphorically, and that you yourself take charge with an element of strength and courage. Strength is a very, very key value and virtue in spiritual life. So faith in yourself, faith in nature means the same as faith in God. That is faith in the divine arrangement. Faith that things will be looked after and taken care of. And those people who have this kind of faith, this is a sattvic kind of shraddha. So we say, sattva nurupa sarvasya shraddha bhavati bharata shraddhamayo yam purusho ya yachraddha sa eva saha. The shraddha of every person, that is every person who has this form in nature, is in accordance with his natural disposition. Man is of the nature of his shraddha, his faith. And what his faith is, that truly he is. This is very plain language. There's no mistake about it. As thy faith is, so be it unto thee. Jesus' words. And of course, we have this whole understanding of free will that we brought up last week, just to refresh your memory. And free will comes increasingly into the play of things in life. The more development there is, the more species develop, the more they can take charge of their own destiny, until finally we have man who can transform himself, as it were, truly into God. But everything is according to its own nature. I was telling a group of people on Sunday that in Zimbabwe, on a farm, there was a goat, and I used to be there and sit there. And as some people know, this Swami is quite fond of bananas, but the goat is also fond of bananas. And the goat ate exactly what the Swami ate. But I have to tell you, the Swami never developed horns, and the goat never developed the capacity to give a lecture on YouTube. So it wasn't in the food, it was in the essence of the entity, the nature of the individual. And this is what we call a root. We find this in Patanjali Yoga Sutras. The root being there, the fruit comes of itself. You can't change it. So we have this nature which has been developed and can develop further. Our behavior can change. We know this through a science, fairly recent science called epigenetics. By changing our pattern of thinking, we change our environment. By changing our environment, we are able to change our physical and psychological destiny, our behavior. And in other words, it's an operation or a manifestation of our free will that determines our destiny. It is not predestined and it is not fixed. Then what kind of worship is there for each kind of person? This has to be mentioned. Yajanti, Satika, Devan, Yakshara, Samshi, Rajasaha, Pretan, Bhuta, Karamscha, Nye, Yayanta, Atmasa, Janaha. The Sattva people, bear in mind, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, the Sattva nature people, how do they worship? This assumes that we all want to worship something. Even the materialist wants to worship something. He dedicated all his energies to the acquisition of material things. As far as the materialist is concerned, we're born at this moment, we end in this moment, and we can do something in between. And there's no real reason for any moral code of behavior other than a law. But some laws are not good, some laws are bad. So there's no real excuse. But the Sattva people, they worship what is known as devas. Now, deva, as we know, means illuminating factors. And we can use all these descriptions of beings as literal beings throughout the universe, subtle beings in different dimensions. But there's another meaning to it, because deva really is the manifestation of that one entity, that one supreme consciousness that manifests differently in different ways throughout the universe, in subtle ways that eventually crystallize and form our gross world. We can think of this universe in layers, therefore. The layer of the devas being one layer, and when we access them, we have purely a spirit of goodness. In other words, as your nature is, your worship will be like that. Supposing my nature is that I love ghosts, I have a ghostly nature. Supposing I have a material nature, I'll worship a matter. So as thy faith is, so be it unto thee. So the devas, divine beings, they are all involved in goodness, harmony, creating harmony for the universe. If you want a harmonious life, then you worship this devas. It's the intention which is there. But similarly, of course, the Rajasic people, they worship what is called the Yakshas and the Rakshasas. And we've seen in previous chapters, these are entities that are dedicated to they're dedicated also to harmony, but selfish harmony. They're to do with values or vices, we might say, of egoism, lust, and greed. Anger, all of these things are associated with these beings. And then the others, the very darkest of beings, the tamasic people, the ignorant people, the people who are averse to light, they worship what are called pretas, and the hosts of bhutas, ghosts, ghouls, and those kinds of things. The dark entities, we can take it in a literal way, but we can also take it in a metaphorical way. That is, that if they are dedicated to the lowest gross aspect of existence, this is what they worship. In this modern day and age, we hear these various phrases, worshipping money, or worshipping prestige, worshipping status. Those who worship status would be the Rajasic type. But those who have a dullness in their mind, these are the tamasic people. And so men, of course, commingle with men in accordance with their temperament and their disposition. And it's but natural that associate whatever we associate with, that is what we are dedicated to. That is, if we are dedicated to goodness, that's one thing. If we're dedicated to self-interest, that's another. And the other aspect of devas will be the divine manifestations of this one supreme entity, this one law of the universe. And it comes out in different aspects, different Ishtadevatas even. It comes out in Hinduism, for example, as Shiva, Vishnu, Ambika, Ganesha, Subramanya, etc. All of these entities, we give the full attribution of divinity to these entities. And we can extend it more. We can extend it to Christ, Buddha, and so on. So the Sattva people, they're actually very few in number. The vast majority will be Rajasic and Tamasic. is not to say it's fixed. And so others are in majority, and their ways are as follows. So, Ashastra vihitam goram tapyante ye tapo janaha damba kamkara samyuktaha kama raga balanvitaha. That's the one portion. Those people who practice violent austerities, not enjoined by the scriptures, given to hypocrisy and egoism, impelled by the force of lust and attachment, such people are there. And we may as well tag on the next one, which says, because it's all to do with the physical. Kashayanta sharirastham bhuta grama achetashaha mamcheva nta sharitrastam tan vidya surani shayan. Fools they are, who torture their bodily organs and me too, who dwell within this body, know that they are asharika in their resolve. We have to remember something stated in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And there we find that there is a wonderful stanza that tells us of the embodied nature of the soul. Navadvare puri dehingi va kurvan na karyan. Now that part says that this entity rests happily in the city of 9 gates, neither acting nor causing others to act. And this ties in with Kathopanishad, which goes further, adding some more gates. But the idea is this body is a city. And so I may have mentioned 2 golden rules. We have to really put things in the true perspective. And then our whole attitude, treatment changes in terms of how we engage in spiritual life. If we revalue this body as a 9-gated city, the Kathopanishad says belonging to something, one of these unborn, ajna, and avakra, one whose consciousness is avakra, unchanging, uncrooked. Then we can say, instead of saying my body, instead of saying I am eating food, we can say I am feeding God's temple. I am servicing God's palace, God's house, the entity that is given in which the Lord of the universe, the whole emperor or empress resides, seated in the heart. Supposing we have this idea, then we'll be dedicated to cleaning. So I mentioned probably on Sunday, what is my job therefore as a spiritual aspirant? What is my title? I am a cleaner. What are you doing? I'm cleaning the body outside and in. I'm cleaning the mind through meditation. How do I clean the body? This comes now into a stanza coming up, because we have to understand that everything comes in threes. And when it comes to the physical body, there are 3 types of people: the lethargic and the lazy. There are the incredibly active go-getter types, all dedicated in their action toward their self-interest. And there are those who have a sense of harmony without any sense of self-interest, working for the good of others, and with the highest values in mind, having the art of replacing this higher, nobler element called sattva, this illuminating element, whenever they see rajas and tamas come on board. Learning the art of doing that, they're able to insert in every given moment that until a minimum requirement is there, as mentioned before, minimum requirement of 51% sattva and 49% others. That's your minimum requirement. And then to maintain it is another issue. So another thing that then is we have to bear in mind is contained in the 15th chapter. Mamai vamso jivaloke jivabhutan sanatanaha manaha sasthani indriyani prakristani karsati. a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful stanza. An eternal portion of myself, says Sri Krishna, having become the embodied soul, this city of 9 gates, and that which sits inside of living beings, draws itself, or draws to itself, the sense organs, the senses. You can imagine some entity there attracting these senses through which it operates. Together with the mind as a sixth sense, which are in nature or prakriti. Now, when we have these two understandings, we can now be in a position to shift our understanding and to promote this sattvic quality. And so it's about resolve. Every religion has a type of person that inserts into their religion a sense of self-torture. In Christianity, we have people, let's say a monastic life, who in the Middle Ages wore hair shirts. So continuously, physically being bristled, being irritated, their skin completely irritated. Of course, in those days, we have to, in our imagination, add to it the phenomena of lice. Because they never used to bathe the body, wearing the same clothing day in, day out, naturally lice will develop on the body and crawl over and bite you. So people will be speaking to you and probably itching and scratching at the same time. And this would be so-called normal behavior. On top of that, you put a hair shirt riddled with lice. Imagine. What are they doing? Are they not torturing this embodied one? This entity, an eternal portion of himself came, attracting all the senses and living in your body, this 9-gated city. Why would we do that to the Lord of the universe? And why would we do it to the instrumentation of his property? So they torture their bodily organs, says the stanza, and me too, who dwell within the body, and know that they are ashuraka in their resolve, and yet religious. But ashuraka in their resolve, it's the resolve that matters. It's not what you do, but what you resolve to do. What is your intention? And supposing you resolve that you don't want the fruits of your activities, or supposing that you dissociate from that, that alone creates a disturbance. How does the mind become restless? It becomes restless because we expect some result somewhere. This is where anxiety comes in. And then torturing the body in this way. I have seen in some countries, people putting hooks through the flesh and dragging chariots. I don't know if anybody else has seen that. Yeah, or you may have seen a film of it, bleeding profusely. At Easter time in the Philippines, you'll find people physically nailing themselves or having people nail themselves to a cross and hanging there like Christ did. And all that pain and torture. Now you may question, what is going through their minds? Is it an exhibition? I have seen people who go into a frenzy and push needles through their cheeks, through their nose, through their ears, through all manner of apertures in the body. And seemingly immune to it. But what is their resolve? What is their intention? Why are they doing this? It's because they don't realize this body is sacred. This body is God's temple, God's dwelling place, God's house. This mind is his sitting room. And so we come on now to an important chapter or an important stanza, I should say, which is now, okay, don't torture the body. Clean it inside, clean it outside. Okay, later we come on to what do we do with the mind, but let's now stick with the human body. What about food? Today it's very fashionable to be health conscious. Means physically conscious in many cases. But there's a reason to be healthy. Health means cleaning the body. From that point of view, you do it through yoga exercise and now through diet also. And there are many nutritionists. If you have 12 nutritionists, you have a debate. 6 on one side, 6 on the other. differences of opinion, on the understanding the body is not the temple of God, but is a box. And in that box, you feed in what you require. No account is made that the Lord, as Vaishvanara mentioned elsewhere, digest your food. You're offering it to the Lord, and the Lord digests your food. That kind of attitude can be there, so that all food can become blessed, sattvic, sacred. So when it comes to food, what happens if we have that attitude? Bearing in mind it's the resolve that's important. Will it not then feed the body more accurately? Will the Lord of the universe not sort out what it wants and reject what it doesn't want, using his own mechanism of absorption and elimination, extracting the nutrition that you require? But some common sense has to be there. Some discipline has to be there. Some rules have to be there. So like everything else, food is also divided into three kinds. And so not only food, but austerities and gifts. And so the intermediate stanza will go like this. Aharas tapi sarvasya trivido bhavati priyaha yajñas tapas tata dhanam tesham vedam imam shrunu. This food also that is dear to all of the three kinds are food that is sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. That is food that is liked by these different people with these different kinds of nature. Also, worship is of three kinds. Also, gifts are of three kinds. Also, austerities are of three kinds. And let's see what these are. And the purpose of laying this out is to see, is our temperament of one of these three types? And if it's of one of the three types, of the lower types, is it possible now to do every action categorized as worship, employing the ritualistic aspect, or the feeling aspect, the emotional aspect of man, devotional aspect? Is it possible to do, and all actions associated that express it? That kind of faith. And what about those kinds of actions that are to do with austerities, disciplines, and what about those that are to do with charity? This categorization is there in all religions. Christianity, they put it in this way: faith, hope, and charity. It covers the same grounds. So the question is asked, what this distinction is, and then we come to a categorization. Now, these are only three simple stanzas. If you want any detailed nutritional advice, you won't get it from here, but by inference, we can catch it. And I have my own understanding of this, and you work out for yourself what you should be eating. Now, common sense tells us what we eat should be nutritious. What we eat should be delicious. What we eat should not be artificially there. The more you manufacture food, the more processed the food is, the more distant it is away from these particular criteria of natural, wholesome food. Food that nature supplies and says, this is good to eat. And during this natural process, we have a natural evolution. Natural evolution means we evolved to discover fire, and that changed all our eating habits. And it also transformed the landscape. Instead of wild forest here in Ireland, abundant with fruit and flowers and so on, where a hunting-gathering lifestyle was engaged in, we now clear vast tracts of land. We deforest whole areas. Let's take areas now, for example, in the west of Ireland, highly forested areas. All those forests taken down, remaining initially as swamps and ultimately as bogs and ultimately as fuel. and also preservative, because we have the bogmen, those people that are mummified in these bogs, and we can find this displayed in museums. So, 3 kinds of food are there. What about the sattvic food? What food is liked, naturally enjoyed by the sattvika? What instinct takes over? And so, ayu sattva balarogya sukha priti vivardhana rasyaha snigdha stira hridyaha sattva kapriya. The foods that help augment vitality, in other words, foods which are digestible. I'm not going to prescribe anything to avoid controversy, but I'm going to ask you to ask yourself one question. What food are you currently eating that is easily digestible? And what food is difficult to digest? What food gives you heartburn or a feeling of heaviness? Ask yourself this question. What food after you're eating it, you feel light and energized? What kind of food is this? Each person will decide for themselves. But guidelines are here. Very specific guidelines. Apart from the general thing that foods that augment vitality, feeling of energy, that energize you, that's release the most sugar at the cellular level, vigor, strength, health, joy, cheerfulness, which are savory. Savory means which are flavorsome. And oleaginous, that is, have the right liquid-solid consistency, not dry. Foods that are substantial, foods that are agreeable, foods that are liked. These are foods that are liked by the sattvika. Now, if you take these individually, you'll have a wonderful diet. You won't have to worry about health. What you'll be doing is you'll be feeding God's temple in a clean, pure, and healthy way. And God will look after the health from there on. It is God that pumps the heart. It is God that moves the lymphatic system around. It is God that supplies all the mechanisms of cellular digestion. It is God that digests your food. It is God that absorbs the nutritious value and discards the rest and never criticizes what you ate. Still digest your food. Such a loving God is there, but still tells you, why don't you eat food that makes you feel good? Now, some people might say, but chocolate makes me feel good. Yes, chocolate burns your throat. You didn't notice it, and doesn't fall into any of these things, any of these categories. Now, there's one rule that I often tell people, just a common sense thing. Supposing you come across a food that is appealing to all the senses in its natural state. It appeals to the eyes. In other words, just looking at it makes you feel joyful. It appeals to your sense of touch, your sense of smell. Texture is there, smell is there, and it tastes good. To all the senses as much as possible, this food seems good for you. Surely Mother Nature is saying, please my child, this is the food that you should eat. But it's according to your nature, your human nature, because there's another being, another organic being, another animal, say, they will find this very unpleasant. So each one suits according to the nature. And then the food is, so basically food that is hard to digest weakens the digestive system and also timeliness. Naturally, if you eat late at night, all your energy will keep you awake. All your energy will be dedicated to digesting your food. And then in the morning, you'll find residual food in the stomach. Ramakrishna makes this one comment. He says, eat as much as you require in the daytime, but reduce the food as much as you can at night. Because if you're healthy, if the body is healthy, you now have removed an unnecessary distraction from concentrating on your destiny, your spiritual life, your divine purpose. What about the Rajasic people? Before I read this, I'm going to read a description. Supposing you had food that left you with this sensation, tingling and burning in the tongue. You ever had food like that? Or food that makes the eyes bloodshot, where tears trickle down and trickle down profusely. I have met some people who say, I love Indian curry because, the hotter the better. And then you see them eat. The first thing happens, their face starts to flush. And then their nose starts to run. And then their eyes start to water. And you ask them, my friend, are you all right? Are you enjoying this? Oh, yes, hotter the better. The more hell I go through, the more delicious it is. It seems a strange thing to me. And so the nostrils water copiously, the head reels, the stomach burns. Have you ever had food like that? These are the characteristics of Rajasic food. Let's put in the stance like this. Katvam la van atm yusna tikshna ruksha vidamina ahara rajasyasta dukkha shokamaya pradaha. The foods that are bitter, here's a list. Any food that is bitter to the taste. Any food that is sour. These are not prohibited foods. These are just enjoyed by the Rajasic temperament. And therefore not conducive to spiritual life. Things which are bitter, things which are sour, things which are salty. Salt is the only rock we decide is good to eat. Halite, sodium chloride. From your chemistry days, you must have seen how if you take sodium by itself and put it in water, it burns and creates caustic soda. It burns up the water, it converts the water, and so it's a what do you call it, hydrophobic. And the human body consists of 70% plus water. What happens in the stomach, the chloride side of it, goes off as hydrochloric acid, and sodium remains free to burn in water and creates hypertension as a result, and can be a carcinogen because of its burning influence. We do require salts, but these are contained in the natural food that we find in the sattvic regime that we just read about and discussed. Now I have to advise you, these are some personal comments, but it's there, we can't get away from it. That if you are Rajasic temperament, please eat foods that are bitter, please eat foods that are sour, and please eat salty foods, Ceylon foods, the foods that we give our children as a reward, and somehow distort their taste. Ultra sweet, making the throat burn, making things indigestible, on the one hand, and on the other, giving them a salty reward. So if you were to put a banner, what should we do for our children? Those people who have that mindset, not knowing any better, would say, let us reward our children with toxic poison. Things which are over hot, things which are pungent, dry and burning, these are liked by the Rajasika. You can decide yourself what foods they are. And things which are productive of pain, grief, and disease, and we might add short-term and long-term. It's now been established, something that we already knew logically, If you want to be fat, eat fat. And if you want to combine fats and carbohydrates together, research has shown us that not only do you have an addiction for this kind of food, but you will also create obesity in the human body because it becomes highly addictive and is the kind of food with that combination that puts weight on. And it's no surprise when we say that this weight, and I'm not speaking now personally, I'm speaking from research, that obesity is a problem in Western societies now. And this obesity will lead to diabetes, will lead to heart disease, and so on. Logic tells us this, research confirms it. Then what about the tamasic type? We can imagine any food that makes you lethargic, heavy, lazy, would be liked by the tamasic people. So here comes the criteria. Yatayaman katal samputi paryo sitam chayat uchistam apicha mejam bhojanam tamas priyam. That which is stale. Now, don't forget, this was brought out in the age prior to refrigeration, prior to deep freezers. But anything which is stale, that is any food that has gone way past its expiry date in modern terms. But stale, of course, anything which is tasteless, anything which is stinking. I don't know if any of you have been into a cheese shop. Those people who like cheese, and those people who are not accustomed to cheese, walking in there, you'll need to hold your nose. There are certain countries, I think Nordic countries, whose delicacy is to have fish that has been hung there out in the open for days on end until it starts to rot and smell, and this becomes a delicacy. Anything that is cooked overnight and left and can go into a state of a putrid state or a rotten state of any kind, either mildly or fully. Anything which is refuse, that is, anything that you should throw away, but you keep and eat. Anything that is impure, polluted. Now, I have to qualify this. You see, there's a yogic idea about purity. Purity is to do, in the yogic sense, more to do with vibration than to do with hygiene. Some food cooked with love, cooked that is nutritious, something that is really offered in a divine way as prasad, this automatically becomes sattvic. And when imbibed with that same sense of sacredness, becomes sattvic to the body. Because the overriding influence in the body is your own thinking. But having said that, we are constitutionally suited to some kinds of food and not to others. So purity, anything that is physically impure, that is, contains bacteria. This whole COVID virus is connected with this subject matter. Anyway, all of these foods are liked by the tamasika. So for that reason, there are some people who do not eat curd or yogurt. Some people on this basis who do not eat cheese. Some people who do not eat anything with yeast in, that is bread that has yeast in, because in their view, it enters into this realm of being fermented. Fermentation comes into this. And fermentation requires the use of bacteria. Anyway, each to his own. These are clues, and you can make your own mind up about whether your diet is sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, and depending on what you like. Then, of course, it goes on. 3 types of worship are there. We'll go through it briefly, and then we'll finish off. Apalankar kakshipir yatnyo vidir sto ya ijyate yastavyam evati manaha samadhyaya sasatikaha. The yajna, that is the adoration and worship. Literally, yajna, the ritualistic worship, that is sattvika, is performed by people desiring no fruit. That is, you engage in it purely from giving, purely as a mobilization for the welfare of all beings. In this way, this is sattvika. So you're not looking for any result, either in meditation or in worship. In other words, you're making sure the mind is not restless from the psychological point of view, as enjoined by ordinance, that is, those who work out the proper methods and most effective ways of doing these ritualistic ceremonies with their mind fixed on this yajna, that is, with full concentration, not simply lighting a fire and after mantra, swaha, throw something into the fire meaninglessly, not knowing what it means. Or in any religion saying, repeating any prayer with occasional breathless breaths. Our Father, art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, hallowed be thy, and so on, like that. Or any other mantras which are put there and throwing something carelessly into a fire. That's of another type. You see, a mother who serves the food to her youngsters expects no reward for it. In this same way, we should do all these particular actions. There's a great story. See, while the Pandava brothers were in exile, a pertinent question was asked. And it was put actually to Yudhishthira. And it was put by Queen Draupadi. Why should these series of troubles and tribulations that the Pandava brothers are going through, why should it befall on people who are the embodiment of Dharma, that is, who are good? There's a book that is published, quite a popular book. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's one of these popular psychology books. And this same question is being posed. But what is reply? His reply is very interesting. In essence, he's saying, I'm not looking at all these things because I am seeing in the background the glorious and magnificent Himalayas, snow-capped. He says, yonder majestic Himalayas, I can't help adoring them. See sorrow-fied snow quarters in my mind, he says, and given to this adoration, it eclipses, you see, all these so-called miseries. Somebody who knows or highlights these miseries, the present glory is escaping them. Abhisamdhaya tu palam dabhartam apichaya iyate bharata sresthatam yajnam viti rajasam. Seeking that which is performed, O best of the Bharatas, in expectation of a reward. And this applies to every activity, because every activity is potential yajna. Or for self-glorification, that is for status or name and fame, not to be of the rajasic type. And then they declare that yajna to be tamasic, which is contrary to the well laid out and understood intentional ordinances of every religion, by which no food is distributed, because charity, that kind of charity and generosity of spirit, is also yajna, the highest yajna, devoid of mantras, that is devoid of movement, thought movements for the benefit of all, and gifts that are distributed in charity, social charity, devoid of name and fame or ownership, just for the welfare of all beings. This generosity of spirit. Those who do these rituals devoid of these things, this is tamasic ritual, mindless ritual. with done carelessly. So these are the three kinds of yajna. And next week, not next week, but the week after, we will go into then what is the threefold austerity. And this chapter is so short that our next session we'll probably finish the entire chapter off. So until we meet again, which might be next week. I'll see how things are going. I happen to be in France next Tuesday, so we'll see whether it's possible to broadcast a Bhagavad Gita session from there. Anyhow, it probably will be possible, but we'll have to see how it goes. So we finish off then with a peace prayer, wishing well to all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.